Once upon a time, in a faraway land, lived a nobleman. Big shot, at least he thought so. He had 3 sons. 2 were smart. They were like those fancy espresso machines, sleek and sophisticated. The 3rd son was Jack. Now, Jack was special. He was like that old coffee percolator, simple and a little rough around the edges. One day, news reached the nobleman. The Princess of Canterbury was looking for a husband. Any man who could answer her riddles would win her hand and a kingdom. Sweet deal, right? The nobleman saw a chance to increase his already impressive, in his mind, social standing.
Boys, pack your bags. We're going to Canterbury.
Now Jack saw his chance too. He wanted to see the princess, maybe tell her a joke or two.
Father, I'm coming too.
The nobleman chuckled. It was a noise that sounded suspiciously like a dying goose.
You, Jack? Don't be ridiculous.
But Jack was persistent, like a bad rash. He begged and pleaded. Finally, the nobleman gave in. He probably thought, what's the worst that could happen? Oh, if only he knew. The 2 older brothers were not thrilled. Imagine having to take your embarrassing uncle to a job interview. That's how they felt.
Jack, you're going to embarrass us.
Yeah, stay out of our way. Jack just grinned. He knew he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but he was happy. He was going on an adventure.
Don't worry, brothers, I have a plan.
Now, the word plan coming from Jack was like hearing a cat say, woof. It just didn't compute. This did little to ease the brothers' worries. And so, the 3 brothers set off for Canterbury. The 2 older brothers rode on their fancy horses. They wore their finest clothes. They looked like they were going to a royal wedding. Jack, on the other hand, rode his trusty donkey, Buttercup. He wore his everyday clothes. He looked like he was going to a pie-eating contest, which, knowing Jack, was entirely possible. The journey was long. The brothers passed through forests. They crossed rivers. They even climbed a mountain or 2. Along the way, Jack kept himself amused. He told jokes to the birds. He tried to teach Buttercup how to sing. He even attempted to make friends with a grumpy-looking badger. Let's just say the badger wasn't impressed. Finally, they reached Canterbury. The palace was huge. It was even bigger than the nobleman's giant ego. The brothers cleaned themselves up. Well, the older 2 did. Jack just gave himself a quick dust-off. He figured the princess wouldn't mind a little dirt. They were ushered into a grand hall. It was filled with important-looking people, and some not-so-important-looking people who were probably there to make the important-looking people feel better about themselves. The Princess of Canterbury sat on a throne. She was beautiful and she looked really bored. The king stood beside her.
To win the princess's hand, you must answer her riddles.
The 2 older brothers puffed up their chests. This was their moment. Jack, meanwhile, was distracted by a shiny spoon a nearby waiter was holding.
My first riddle. What can be cracked, beaten, and whipped, yet still holds a heart of gold?
A chest of gold, your highness.
The princess sighed. Wrong.
A valiant knight's armor, your highness.
The princess rolled her eyes. Strike 2.
An egg, your highness.
The princess smiled. Finally, someone who wasn't an idiot. The crowd gasped. The brothers were flabbergasted. How did their simpleton brother know the answer? The princess continued with 2 more riddles. Each time the brothers failed miserably. And each time Jack, with his simple logic and goofy charm, guessed the answers. He used a stick to represent a day, stating it had a morning, one end, a noon, middle, and a night, other end. He then used a nut to represent truth, for it was hidden inside like a secret. The crowd was bewildered. The king was speechless. The queen? Well, the queen had already decided she liked Jack. He seemed like a fun guy. The princess, intrigued by the seemingly dim-witted but surprisingly clever shepherd, decided to give him one final challenge.
Very well, Jack. Spend 1 night in the haunted tower, and if you survive, you shall be my husband.
Now, most people would be terrified. Not Jack. He loved a good ghost story.
Sounds like fun.
He exclaimed, much to everyone's astonishment. That night, Jack was escorted to the tower. It was old, dusty, and filled with cobwebs. Perfect. Jack settled down for the night. He told jokes to the ghosts. He played hide-and-seek with the skeletons. He even had a staring contest with a portrait of a particularly grumpy-looking king. Let's just say the portrait blinked first. Meanwhile, the princess was watching from her window. She couldn't believe how fearless Jack was, and how much fun he seemed to be having. She found herself laughing for the first time in what felt like forever. In the middle of the night, Jack got hungry. He decided to go fishing in the moat of a haunted tower, because why not? He found an old fishing rod and cast his line. Instead of a fish, he pulled up a boot, then a rusty bucket. Then, much to his surprise, a beautiful silver locket.
Look what I found.
He climbed down from the tower and presented the locket to the princess.
You found it. You are truly remarkable.
The princess gasped. It was her locket. She had lost it years ago. Her eyes shone with tears. The next morning, the king summoned everyone to the hall. He was not happy. He had expected Jack to be scared out of his wits. He was not expecting Jack to be having breakfast with the court jester and a very friendly ghost named Gus.
Jack, you were supposed to be terrified. The tower is haunted.
Haunted it is, nobody told me.
The king was speechless. The queen stifled a giggle. The princess just smiled. She knew she had found someone special. The king, seeing that he was defeated, grudgingly agreed to honor his word. Jack and the princess were married that very day. The wedding was interesting.
How about I use my fishing rod as a bouquet?
The princess managed to talk him out of it. Eventually, the two older brothers were furious.
This is outrageous.
We'll return with an army of squirrels or something.
Nobody really paid attention. They were too busy watching Jack try to teach the princess how to fish. And so Jack, the shepherd who was considered a fool, became the Prince of Canterbury. He may not have been the sharpest knife in the drawer, but he was kind, funny, and had a heart of gold. And in the end, isn't that what really matters? Well, that and the fact that he was now a prince. That part was pretty great too. The princess quickly learned to appreciate Jack's unique brand of humor. The queen, of course, adored him. The king, well, the king was still trying to figure out how it all happened. But that, as they say, is another story.